Now I would like to invite up our two governors who we're going to have a very nice discussion, and we're going to talk about governing in the state of New Jersey. So I'd like to invite up Governor Florio and Governor DiFrancesco. So I was saying this morning that I was really looking forward to this because this really gives us an opportunity to have a nice informal and engaging discussion to hear from two, I would say, battle-tested governors who came into a state as a leader at a time that you each had significant challenges in front of you. So Governor Florio, an 8-term congressman, the 49th governor of the state of New Jersey, you came in facing a $3 billion deficit. No simple challenge, and all the things you had to do to then step into that and to be able to govern through that. And I always like to share something a little bit that we found off that maybe is a fact that you don't know about our speakers. One thing I found is that you were a Navy boxer. And so you can see where that grit came from in order to get in and know how to make a difference. So Governor Florio, thank you for joining us, and we're going to talk a little bit about your book as well. And then also we have Don DiFrancesco, who was the longest-serving Senate president and the 51st governor. Now, you came in and governed post-September 11. And that created its own challenge in a unique way as well. And also, you came in when a sitting governor left and had to come in first as an acting capacity, which brings its own challenges in terms of how you interact with folks and make your way across the aisle. But the thing I learned about you also is that you were your senior class president in high school. So as we see, the types of, what leads you to things is absolutely past experiences. And it's all those past experiences that oftentimes informs how you take your life forward and how you come to a particular position. And so the first thing I wanted to ask both of you is how the different offices you held before being governor, how do those experiences help guide your philosophy in governing? And then share with us what your philosophy in governing is.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that's the theme of the book is that your life experiences do shape your values and your principles. And likewise, your principles are shaped by the things you do. So there is the opportunity to take advantage of that. But the whole thought about how it is that we deal with these problems is something that's very important as well. Getting people engaged and involved is really another key theme, trying to talk about how it's very important for people, real people, become engaged in the process because it's called participatory democracy. The system doesn't work unless we all work at making it work. So outreach, like we're having here today, is extremely important. And then you have to be informed about what's going on because the problems are becoming much more complex. And you can't fix something you don't understand. And so you have to know what the options are, what the alternatives are. And we heard that this morning from some of the panels.
And it's interesting, in your book, Governor, page 55, one of your mentors, Assemblyman John Horne, in there you talk about the fact that what you learned from him, or some guidance he gave you along the ways, try to avoid making decisions as long as possible.
Well, John has passed on now, but he was a labor union fellow, very salt of the earth guy. Camden, he and I were from Camden at the time, and he had some little wisdom for me. The first part was to maintain your base. Always keep your base comfortable. The other part is don't make decisions as long as you can possibly can. And I challenged him one day. I was a staff person for him before I became his colleague in the legislature. And I heard him say to somebody that he agreed with them 100%. Then the next person who was taking a position that was 100% opposite the previous one, he agreed with him as well. And I said, John, I don't understand how you can agree with everybody. He says, well, none of these things, most of them don't come to pass. So I just tell people what they want to hear, and then ultimately when I have to make a decision, somebody will be unhappy, but it'll be fewer people unhappy than if I told people what I really thought. I accepted his first premise that the base is important to maintain. The second one I was never very good at avoiding making decisions. Some said I made too many decisions. But John had a lot of wisdom from an old school.
Mm-hmm. Governor DiFrancesco, you, again, the longest-serving Senate president, I'm sure that gave you an express type of experience that you brought into your role as governor.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I was a post-Watergate Assembly candidate. I was fortunate enough to be elected from Union County, and we had very few people in the legislature at that time. And these things do go in cycles to some degree, well, at least I hope they do. But I served in the legislature 26 years, so it's a different perspective than perhaps Governor Florio had, because he was in the legislature for a couple of years and then down to Washington for many years. And I languished in the minority for 15 years. Bob Franks was my running mate for a long time, and we were fortunate enough to win in 1991 a lot of seats. It was kind of a reversal of when I first entered the legislature, and a little history lesson, in 76. You know, the numbers were overwhelming before I got there in terms of the Assembly was 66-14. The Senate was 31-9. It was devastating, but by the time 1991 came, in the Senate we had 27 seats and they had 13. And the Assembly we had 62 and they had the balance. So it did reverse itself, and I was fortunate enough to be in there at the right time, in the right place. I was lucky. I was lucky my colleagues trusted me and picked me to be Senate President. For 10 years, I worked with Governor Florio for two as Senate President, and 7 with Governor Whitman, and of course, 1 year I was both. And that was pretty cool, because you could run the Senate and be governor at the same time is pretty unique.
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, when I went to the inauguration of Bush, I guess it's 43, as governor, just a couple days, Governor Engler from Michigan, if you remember, he was the governor for a couple terms. He came up to me and said, "Are you the guy from New Jersey?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I read where you control the Senate and you're governor at the same time." He said, "Yeah." He said, "That's unbelievable. I would love to have that." And I guess that's when I found out that every governor, at least in those days, every governor read the Sunday New York Times, because the Times had written a big article about it. And so I was lucky. Right place, right time, both cases. Watergate, Senate President.
Michele, interesting, another part of the experience that I brought to was being in the state legislature for 4 years and then going to Congress. And the difference between legislative capability and the congressional capability in those days was dramatic. There was virtually no staff at the legislative level. The committee system was very unrefined, nothing like what it is now. Then I went to Congress and I thought I died and went to heaven. There's huge staffs, really sophisticated system, and it worked very well. And then, of course, the contrast between being a legislator and then being the executive was dramatic as well. As a congressman, and you heard Congressman Pallone this morning, it's clear that he has really mastered the material. He knows what he's talking about. Congressmen focus on their committee, as you heard him focus on his committee. And that's where you can really go in depth, and I'm very comfortable with that sort of an approach. As governor, you have more authority across the board, but you have to rely upon other people for the depth, because you just can't afford to go into things in great depth. But the difference between the legislature and the executive is dramatic, but it's both are intriguing in some respects.
And it's interesting, I know you referenced, I saw you snuck out to buy a book. And
Well, I gotta have this book. I'm with him all the time. I gotta have the book, you know.
But you will be very pleased to see, because you just referenced that the two of you worked together in your roles when you were Senate President and when you were
He
governor.
didn't like me.
The book suggests you had a very, very respectful relationship, and the two of you got a lot accomplished. And in hindsight, you know, Governor Florio, you talk in your book about the restoration of civil discourse. You two found a way to that when you were working together. I would ask you today, the term bipartisanship, I mean, do we have it? Does it exist? And what is the secret for reaching across the aisle and working with the opposite party? If you could give us a lesson in that today, and maybe we can all impart that to others as we leave as well.
It's not even the same world. I mean, the fact of the matter of civility is gone. Many of the things, and I take pride in having a legislative accomplishment record in the Congress that's fairly substantial. The Pinelands, Superfund, a whole bunch of different things. But every one of those pieces of legislation I got through with the active assistance of the Republican members of my committee. A fellow Norm Lent from Long Island. They were really very collaborative, and there was a give and take, and it resulted. Now you don't have that, and that's really troubling. We're missing something.
Yeah.
You know, you referenced the staff issue, because when you were there, I was there subsequent to Governor Florio in the legislature, And when I got there, he's right, the staff allotment was very meager. We only had 2 or 3 people on staff in the Assembly minority. And subsequent to that, Alan Karcher and Chuck Hardwick changed that dramatically. But just as an example, one legislator from Hudson County, Assemblyman-elect, I think we were given $15,000 for staff. He gave 100 of his friends $150. So we had to change those rules so that you had to have employees and stuff like that. So it has changed dramatically. And part of the reason why Alan Karcher and Chuck Hardwick thought we should take it to another level, increase the staff allowance, be able to participate in setting policy is that historically, the governor had dominated the public policy arena up until that time.
Okay. Yeah.
And they wanted to have more of a level playing field from the legislative perspective, and those are the 2 people that caused it to happen, is what we have today. We have lots of staff, lots of very people with great expertise on these staffs, on both Republicans and Democrats, so it's a lot better from perspective of leverage with the governor than it used to be. The difference is, though, when you're governor, and it was only 1 year for me, you have a tremendous responsibility. I used to say, you could be a U.S. senator, and I have no idea what you're doing every day. I don't have a clue. I don't even know how you're voting, and I'm an involved person, by and large. And so it's a great club, the U.S. Senate. It's a great club because we have no clues what these people are doing on a day-to-day basis. You're governor, every day the press wants to know what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you're going. So it's a huge difference. It's a huge responsibility representing the state. And every day something happens where you have to involve your staff or your cabinet or your state employees in some issue, 9/11 being, of course, the best example for me. So it is a huge responsibility. It's a lot different than being a legislator and sit back and say, I'm going to vote for this, I'm not going to vote for this. You don't have as much responsibility. And I found that to be a huge difference. It's amazing.
But pros and cons from then to now. When there was, I respect and appreciate the level of depth and sophistication and staff in order to help to better inform. At the same time, you've now created some more layers, and does that make the communication then, in terms of policymaker to policymaker, a step removed? And might that be a little bit of a reason why today we don't have our legislators talking directly to each other?
I think a lot of it has to do with social media. Personally, we didn't have that. I think social media polarizes political people. I mean, because they say and do things publicly they would never do before, so it kind of is polarizing, and people take positions in social media that they might not otherwise do. I think that has contributed dramatically to the partisanship, I believe. And in my case, when I was in the minority and I was Senate Minority Leader, I'd carry the Senate President's bags if I had to get a bill passed. I mean, you do what you have to do in order to generate a consensus-building situation. As Senate President, I had 27 Republicans and 13 Democrats to start with. And I wanted every single one of them to be able to vote the way I wanted them to vote. So you build those relationships. So-and-so might want a bill passed, and that's important to them. This person might want to get a job for somebody, and that's important to them. This person, maybe you just got to go to golf with that person, and that's important to them. Joe Bubba, I used to take him golfing all the time. It drove me crazy, but I got his vote when I had to. Hank McNamara, I had to go to Bergen, Canada, to have dinner with him every once in a while. So it's your responsibility, at least as a legislative leader, to make sure that you develop these relationships, because you're going to say to these people, I need your vote. Yeah. And even though they don't want to vote for it, I need your vote. And it's a time-consuming situation, but you have to do it. And now we see it today. I've been there when the Democrats have controlled everything. I've been there when the Republicans controlled everything. I've been there when Tom Kean was governor and the Democrats. But today, there shouldn't be this infighting that they're having today. That this should be resolved more quickly. It's not good for the state. It's not good for our image. It's not good for the legislature. And I think they have to resolve their differences in a quiet and mannerly way.
And we always talk about the power of relationships. I mean, in the end, it comes back to the power of the relationship and understanding how to forge each one.
I mean, also the complexity of the issues that we're facing nowadays. It's one of the reasons why I've never supported term limits for legislators. I mean, the legislators are dealing with these complex problems. You need time to master it. As we saw today with Congressman Pallone. I mean, he has just grown so dramatically over the last number of years. Yeah.
He's been there forever.
And he's now formidable. If you're not formidable, you have to deal with people interests from outside, know more than you do. Deal with the executive branch, has more resources than you do. So you're supposed to be representing the people that your constituents. And if you don't have the information, knowledge is power. And if you don't have the information comparable to what the adversary or the person on the other side of the issue has, you're not going to be very successful.
That's a great point. You heard a lot today, and from our Business Outlook survey, that the #1 concern on the minds of New Jersey business is taxes, taxes, and taxes. You both faced fiscal challenges, and you had to have discussions around raising taxes versus not, and how do you take care of the important issues and govern the state and have enough money to do it, balancing that with raising taxes. If you could each share with us your thought process around raising taxes, the balance, and how you came to the decisions you did during your term.
But let me start. Go ahead. Because it's a different perspective. When I was elected, there was no income tax in 1976. Even though the Democrats controlled the legislature with huge margins after Watergate, they couldn't get the income tax passed. They had already passed the thorough and efficient law, and they needed the funding to fund the thorough and efficient. So in '76, my first year, the income tax passed. And it was supposed to be the end all. It's 2% to 2.5%, 2%, 2.5%. And that was going to raise all the money for education, blah, blah, blah. I would say around this time in 1982, income tax went up to 3.5%. Tom Kean was governor. He signed it. We passed it in the Senate and Assembly. It was somewhere around New Year's Eve. 10 years later, it went up to 7%. I left. We reduced it to 6.2. Governor Whitman raised it to 6.2. I left it. Now it's 9. We have an exit tax. We have a mansion tax. We have income taxes. We have sales tax. We have every tax you possibly think of. And now we even have higher gas taxes. So the trend was bad. To be competitive in this country, we're not competitive from the income tax standpoint because it's a tax on gross income. It started out at 2 and 2.5% because it was a tax on gross income, no deductions, et cetera. Okay, that sounded great, blah, blah, blah. Now it's 9% and still a tax on gross income. And the only thing I added during the course of that after we reduced it to 6.2 was the $10,000 property tax deduction, which was 2000, and it's 2018, yeah. And property taxes have gone up dramatically. It's a problem, and by letting the 2% cap expire, which is what I understand happened,
yes,
it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing. I think that the Democratic legislature and the Governor Christie in enacting that 2% cap was a great thing with respect to the real estate tax and the ability to negotiate contracts with public employee unions. It gave you some leverage with respect to negotiations. Now that's gone again. And I understand about promises during the campaign and all of that. I get that. But that's hurting. That's hurting with respect to the tax. And everybody should pay their fair share of taxes, but that hurts. When it comes to competitiveness around the region in this country, we're not very competitive at all, tax-wise. We have a great state, great location, geographic location. It's all been talked about earlier. Fantastic skilled workforce. We have a lot of things going for us, no question about it. But that's a problem. That's a big problem.
It's a challenge. Governor Florio, again, coming into $3 billion deficit facing you walking in the door, what was your thought process on how you're going to enter that budget? Because you're hit with that budget season right when you walk in.
Well, it was a bit of a surprise because we had been told there'd be a $300 million surplus when we came into office. And we come in the middle of the year, come in January, the fiscal year ends at the end of June. And it turned out not to be a $300 million surplus, but a $600 million shortfall. That's in the half year that you're already in the middle of. And then we projected $2 billion shortfall for the next year. So you're talking about 2.8 or something million. And there's no alternative because the budget has to be balanced. So what we did is, first of all, made dramatic cuts in a whole lot of area. So people were protesting the cuts. And then we said, well, that doesn't get us there. We're going to have to raise money. We raised money. And I guess the point I would take is one of the panelists today talked about New Jersey's major problem being a structural problem, which is true. I mean, think about it. We have a $60 billion shortfall in the pension system, a $40 billion shortfall in the health insurance program. I don't know where you talk about those types of numbers and do anything with it. So the problem, of course, is that nothing is for nothing. And so what we did, we cut taxes in the mid-90s. And we cut taxes dramatically, but we didn't pay for the lost revenue. What we did is say, we're not going to contribute to the pension system. And so I was the last governor to fully fund the state pension system. Down to today, the state-funded pension system is not funded to the tune of almost $60 billion. So again, nothing is for nothing. And so you have to make some decisions about what you want to cut. And you can't cut $60 billion because the budget's only, I think, $37 billion. We have a structural problem that almost defies description as to how we're going to cope with it. Someday, if we have a couple of hours, I'll give you my thought as to how we're going to solve it.
Well, break out the whiteboard. It sounds like another event.
Because we really are just all jerking ourselves around by thinking on a plane over the next 10 years or so. I'm anticipating, and you can write down that I said this, I'm anticipating that within the next 10 years, we'll have a situation where every governor in the state, because New Jersey is not the worst off. I mean, the other states are worse off than we are. But every governor in the nation will go to Washington, and whoever the president is, they'll be saying, here are the keys to my state house. I can't deal with it anymore. You're going to have to deal with it in a different way. And
Well, that's doom and gloom, but I do want to mention that what Governor Christie and the Democratic legislature did with respect to pension reform was monumental, in my opinion. Very difficult to accomplish, and they did something that helped a lot. It was a result of, lots of people like me and others who had perhaps not been able to do these kinds of things. But what they accomplished was really a good thing, yeah. I thought. That plus the 2% cap were key things with respect to. And
it was a start, and we can build momentum, which is our goal, to build momentum off of that.
But I think what's interesting is, notwithstanding that, we're still $60 billion in the hole.
Absolutely. So I had said that we talked so much about so many serious things today that I wanted a nice aspect of this to be inspirational to our audience, because I want everyone leaving feeling really good about what we talked about today and being inspired to go out there and be these great leaders, right? So what is, for you, what was the magic moment in your governorship, the one thing that you were either the most proud of or the thing that just inspired you most about having the seat?
I think the bipartisanship of the development that we've had. We've got a whole lot of good things. We paid for the Performing Arts Center in Newark, Convention Hall in Atlantic City, the stadium expansion at Rutgers, the Blaustein Building, Civic Square. So we were able to bring together everybody to understand that construction is good for everyone. If you go and put together facilities that are not necessarily going to generate jobs themselves, but as the Performing Arts Center has done, is a catalyst for the economic development beyond just the four walls of what you're building. That was very satisfying.
And Governor DiFrancesco?
First, I want to say there was somebody that I saw outside who mentioned the Legislative Correspondence Dinner that I spoke at in 2001. I guess it was right after I decided I wasn't going to run, and so Tom Wilson said to me, you should do this kind of Bulworth thing. And I didn't even know what he was talking about, and then I found out what he meant. And so, I did this rap thing, and kind of a spoof, because I just picked on are there any reporters left here? I picked on every reporter I could in this rap, but I started out by saying things like, the state bird of New Jersey is the middle finger. Traffic, we got traffic. You don't like traffic, leave. When I'm governor, I'm going to put up a sign, welcome to New Jersey, now get out. But, so, you know, kind of tongue in cheek, but I think from my perspective, we have such a great state. We have such a great population, and it's a diverse, highly educated population. We have a good location for businesses. You know, you can live in the mountains and be at the shore in an hour and 15 minutes. You can be in New York City in an hour. It's a phenomenal location, and CEOs would tell you that, as you know, all the time. They love living here because of what I just said. They don't like paying the taxes, but they love living here. From my standpoint, you know, I only had 1 year, and, you know, as I said, it was an easy legislative year because we controlled the Senate. But the 9/11 issue, you know, really dominated 4 months of the term, and then we had an anthrax issue. So it was a great honor for me to be there that 1 year. It was a great honor for me to be governor at the same time that this 9/11 occurred, as tragic as it was, as devastating as it was, and work with, you know, Mayor Giuliani and also Governor Pataki at the same time. So that was my highlight of the year, is just being able to represent the people of New Jersey on our recovery. It was a huge recovery, and we're still recovering, quite frankly, from that. It changed our way of life completely, as you all know, and it's going to stay that way. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And then just in terms of being inspired, you know, Governor Florio, I had the opportunity to read your book. You can see my tabs in here. And it's a great story in terms of what you learned through your public life. And I just ask you briefly to just share what caused you to write this book.
Well, it's interesting. When I was in Congress, I used to teach at the law school at Rutgers on Monday morning, teach my class, and then get the train and go to Washington. And I taught administrative law, and for the non-lawyers in the audience, administrative law deals with regulatory matters. And I designed a course that was designed to deal with administrative law on examples of things I was intimately involved in Congress. I did with EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. I dealt with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, the old ICC, and State Commerce Commission. And these are real things that I dealt with in Congress that I made into a course. And it was interesting. It was well received. And so I got this thought that people have been asking me to write a book after I left office. And I said no. But then finally I had this insight, maybe I could design the book on my life experiences as to how they helped shape my values and how my values helped shape my experiences in the legislature. And that's what the book is about. I mean, it's a whole bunch of things that I've done, how they're relevant to principles, values, policies, and I think it's pretty good.
Nice. Well, I just want to, I want to bring
good.
one quote out that I think sums up for both of these gentlemen. Commit yourself to solving people's problems. And the two of you have been lifelong public servants amongst everything else you've done in your life. And you continue to give back to the state of New Jersey. And collectively, we thank you for that. Thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause for our governor.
Thank you, Michele.